For 36 years, I was the invisible daughter, the one who gave up her scholarship so her little sister could go to college, the one who worked double shifts while everyone celebrated Amanda's promotions, the one whose name was never mentioned at family dinners except as a cautionary tale. So when Amanda saw me walk into Blackwell Bank that Friday morning, she didn't just smile, she performed. "Everyone, this is my older sister," she announced loud enough for the entire marble lobby to hear. "She needs help checking her balance." Her colleagues exchanged knowing smirks. A customer in line looked at me with pity. Amanda's fingers flew across the keyboard, her red nails clicking like a countdown. "Let's see what we're working with here, shall we?" Then her hand stopped. Her smile cracked. The screen glowed with a number that made her face turn white. 47-286-123. She whispered, "This can't be yours." But what happened next, the secret I'd kept for 18 years, would shatter everything she thought she knew about me. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most? My name is Rachel Holt, and I am 36 years old. For the past 15 years, I have built a senior care company called Sunrise Senior Care, from a single rented room into a network that serves thousands of elderly patients across 3 states. But if you asked my family what I do for a living, they would probably shrug and say something about that little job in the city. I pulled into my parents' driveway in Blackwell on a Thursday evening, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my tyres. The house looked exactly as it had when I left 18 years ago. White siding, black shutters, and a welcome mat that had never really felt like it included me. I sat in my car for a moment, preparing myself for what I knew was coming. Family dinners in the Holt household followed a predictable script, and my role had been written long before I understood I was playing it. The smell of my mother's pot roast greeted me at the door, along with the sound of laughter coming from the dining room. Amanda's laughter. My younger sister had a way of filling every room she entered, and tonight was no exception. "Rachel, you made it," my mother said, giving me a quick hug that felt more like a formality than an embrace. Amanda was just telling us about her promotion, assistant branch manager at Blackwell Bank. Can you believe it? I could believe it. I had heard about the promotion 3 times already, once on the phone, once in a text message, and now in person. My father stood up from the table to pour Amanda another glass of wine, his face beaming with pride. "That's wonderful," I said, taking my seat at the corner of the table. "Congratulations, Amanda." My sister smiled at me with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Thank you, Rachel. It's been a lot of hard work, but it's finally paying off." She paused, tilting her head as if noticing me for the first time. "What about you, still doing that little job in the city? Have you managed to save anything yet?" I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the one that appeared every time I sat at this table. "I'm doing fine," I said quietly. "Fine isn't exactly thriving," my father remarked, not unkindly, but the words still stung. "Amanda could give you some financial advice if you need it. She's quite the expert now." I glanced at the living room wall while they continued discussing Amanda's bright future. 12 framed photographs hung in a careful arrangement. Amanda's college graduation, Amanda's wedding, Amanda's first day at the bank, Amanda receiving an award. My eyes found the single photo that included me. It was from a family reunion years ago. I stood at the edge of the frame, half my face cropped out as if even the camera had decided I did not quite belong. A memory surfaced unbidden. I was 18, holding a letter that said I had won a full scholarship to State University. I remembered running to my parents, breathless with excitement. I remembered my mother's face falling, then rearranging into something practical. "Amanda needs this opportunity more than you do, Rachel. You're the older sister. You should sacrifice." I went to work at the local grocery store the following week. Amanda went to college. "Rachel, are you even listening?" Amanda's voice cut through my thoughts. "Sorry," I said. "What did you say?" Amanda leaned forward, a mocking smile playing on her lips. I asked if you even know how much is in your bank account. Honestly, you've always been so careless with money. My hand moved without thinking, touching my wallet in my purse. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper I had carried for 18 years, a reminder of a night that changed everything. But I said nothing. Amanda's eyes sparkled with amusement. Tell you what, come to the bank tomorrow. I'll check your account for you personally. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast. So you can finally know where you stand in life. I looked at my sister, at my parents, nodding in agreement at the wall of photographs that told the story of a family with only one daughter worth remembering. All right, I said softly. I'll be there. The next morning, Amanda picked me up in her silver SUV, the leather seats still smelling like the dealership. She had insisted on driving, claiming it would give us sister time, though I suspected it was really about making sure I arrived at the bank on her terms, in her car under her control. I climbed into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt while Amanda adjusted her mirrors, with the precision of someone who needed everything in her life to be perfectly arranged. I'm glad you agreed to come, Amanda said as she pulled out of our parents' driveway. Honestly, Rachel, I've been worried about you. You're 36 years old and you still seem so lost. No husband, no children, no real career to speak of. It breaks my heart. I watched the familiar streets of Blackwell pass by the window, the same storefronts and the same sidewalks I had walked as a teenager. I appreciate your concern, I said. Amanda laughed, a sound that was meant to seem affectionate but carried an edge beneath it. You always say that. You appreciate things, you understand things, but you never actually do anything about your situation. That's your problem, you know. You never learn to plan. She gestured at herself at the car at the diamond ring on her finger. Look at me. I have a 4-bedroom house in the nicest neighbourhood in town. My husband is a doctor. My children go to private school. And you know why? Because I made a plan and I followed it. I nodded, letting her words wash over me like water against stone. I had heard variations of this speech many times before, at family gatherings and holiday dinners, and phone calls that always seemed to circle back to the same conclusion. Amanda was successful. I was not. This was the natural order of things in the Holt family. You just drift through life, Amanda continued, warming to her subject. You take whatever comes your way instead of going after what you want. And that's why you're invisible, Rachel. That's why nobody notices you. You've made yourself easy to overlook. The words landed somewhere deep in my chest, in a place I had thought was numb by now. I turned to look at my sister, at her perfect makeup, and her confident posture and her absolute certainty that she understood the world better than I ever could. You know what's really wrong with you, Amanda said, glancing at me with something that might have been pity. You don't know your own worth. You live like a shadow, and then you wonder why no one sees you. It's honestly sad. I was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children playing in a park we passed. Maybe today I'll finally learn my worth, I said softly. Amanda did not seem to hear me, or perhaps she simply did not think my response was worth acknowledging. She had already moved on to discussing her plans for redecorating her living room, and I let my mind drift to the memories I had never shared with anyone. I remembered the phone call I received 8 years ago, when Amanda was trying to buy her first house. She had been short on the down payment by $30,000, and she had called me in tears saying the deal would fall through without it. I wired her the money the next day. She promised to pay me back within a year. She never mentioned it again, and I never asked. The house she lived in, or was she now the one she bragged about so casually, had been built on that foundation. I remembered the reference letter that helped Amanda get her job at Blackwell Bank. She never knew that I had called in a favour from a college friend who worked in the regional office, asking him to put in a good word for my sister. Amanda believed she had earned that position entirely, so essentially, on her own merit. I let her believe it because her confidence seemed more important than my acknowledgement. I remembered the 4 months I spent caring for our mother during her cancer treatment 3 years ago. I had taken a leave of absence from my company, moved back to Blackwell temporarily, and spent every day at the hospital or at our parents' house managing medications and appointments and the endless paperwork of serious illness. Amanda visited 3 times during those 4 months. She sent flowers once. At the end, our mother told everyone that she could not have survived without Amanda's support. These memories did not make me angry anymore. They had settled into something quieter, a kind of acceptance that this was simply how my family worked. I was the sister who gave. Amanda was the sister who received. The imbalance had existed for so long that no one even noticed it anymore. Amanda turned into the parking lot of Blackwell Bank, pulling into a spot near the entrance that I suspected was reserved for employees of her rank. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed her hair and smiled at herself with satisfaction. "Ready?" she asked me. "Ready," I said. We walked through the glass doors together and I watched Amanda transform before my eyes. Her posture straightened, her smile widened, her voice became louder and warmer, designed to carry across the marble lobby and reach every colleague within earshot. "Good morning, everyone," she called out, waving to the tellers and the loan officers and the security guard by the door. "I brought a special guest today. This is my sister Rachel. She needs some help with her account, poor thing. I told her I would personally make sure she's taken care of." I saw the looks exchanged between the employees, the knowing glances and the suppressed smiles. Amanda had clearly talked about me before, and not in flattering terms. I was the struggling older sister, the cautionary tale. The example of what happened when you did not plan your life as carefully as Amanda had planned hers. A young teller approached us with a sympathetic expression. "Is there anything I can help with, Ms. Holt?" Amanda waved her away with a gracious hand. No, I'll handle this personally. Family takes care of family after all." She led me to a service desk near the centre of the lobby, positioning us where everyone could see. This was not about helping me. This was about performing generosity in front of an audience. I understood that, and I did not mind. Amanda had always needed witnesses to validate her kindness. She sat down at the computer terminal and gestured for me to take the seat across from her. The marble floors gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. The brass fixtures sparkled. Somewhere behind us a phone rang and was quickly answered. Amanda spread her arms wide as if presenting me with a gift. "Welcome to my kingdom, sister." Her smile was radiant and sharp. "Let's see what your account has to say about you." I handed Amanda my account number on a small piece of paper, the same 12 digits I had memorized years ago when my company first started generating real revenue. She took it from me without looking, already turning to a colleague who had wandered over to watch the show. The colleague was a young woman with a name tag that read Jennifer, and she leaned against a nearby pillar with the casual interest of someone expecting entertainment. "Get ready for this," Amanda said to Jennifer, loud enough for the customers in line to hear. "I bet she doesn't even have $500 in here. My sister has never been good with money. Some people just aren't built for financial planning. You know." Jennifer smirked and nodded, playing her part in Amanda's performance. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my face showing nothing. I had learned a long time ago that my family interpreted my silence as confirmation of their assumptions. They saw what they expected to see. Today, I would let them look a little longer. Amanda typed in my account number with a flourish, her red fingernails clicking against the keyboard like a drum roll before a punchline. She was already composing her expression of sympathetic disappointment, the face she would make when she turned the screen toward me and showed everyone how little I had managed to save. I watched her eyes move to the monitor, watched her lips begin to form words of gentle condescension. And then, everything stopped. Amanda's fingers froze above the keyboard. Her smile did not fade so much as shatter, breaking apart piece by piece, as her brain tried to process what her eyes were seeing. The colour drained from her face so quickly that I thought for a moment she might faint. Jennifer leaned in to see what had caused the reaction, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. She stepped back as if the screen had burned her, bumping into a customer who had been waiting nearby. The customer craned his neck to look, and his eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. The number on the screen was $47,284,651.23. The lobby fell silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant ring of a telephone, that no one moved to answer the soft shuffle of feet as more employees drifted closer to see what had caused the commotion. Whispers began spreading like ripples in water, moving from desk to desk, teller to teller. Amanda stared at the screen for what felt like a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice came out cracked and thin, nothing like the confident tone she had used moments before. "This is a system error," she said. "There's no way. This can't be right. You can't possibly have this kind of money." She refreshed the screen with trembling hands. The number remained exactly the same. She clicked on the account history, scrolling through transaction after transaction, her breathing becoming more rapid with each entry she read. I knew what she was seeing. Deposits from Sunrise. Senior Care LLC, the company I had built from nothing. Transfers from investment accounts that had grown steadily over 15 years. Dividend payments from stocks I had purchased when they were cheap and held while they multiplied in value. Every dollar accounted for every transaction, legitimate, every cent earned through work that my family had never bothered to ask about. "This doesn't make sense," Amanda whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "You work some little job. You rent an apartment. You drive a used car. How can you have $47 million? How is this possible?" I looked at my sister at the confusion and fear battling for control of her features, and I felt something I had not expected. Not satisfaction exactly, though there was an element of that. More like a door finally opening after years of being locked. A window letting light into a room that had been dark for far too long. "Is there a problem with my account, Amanda?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. "You seem surprised." Amanda's head snapped towards me, and I saw something new in her eyes. It was not just shock anymore. There was anger there, and beneath the anger, something that looked almost like terror. Her entire understanding of our relationship, of our family dynamics, of who held power and who did not, was crumbling in front of her. Jennifer had backed away entirely now, pretending to organize papers at a nearby desk while stealing glances at us. The other employees had found reasons to move closer, their curiosity overcoming their professionalism. I heard someone whisper the number to a colleague who had just arrived, and I heard the colleague's disbelieving response. Amanda stood up so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and bumped into the desk behind her. She grabbed my arm with a grip that was almost painful, her fingers digging into my flesh through my sleeve. "Come with me," she hissed. "Right now." She pulled me across the lobby toward a hallway I assumed led to private offices and meeting rooms. I did not resist letting her guide me past the staring faces and the hushed conversations. I caught fragments of whispered speculation as we passed. Who is she? How did she get that money? Did you see Amanda's face? Amanda found an empty meeting room and shoved me inside, following close behind, and slamming the door with enough force to rattle the blinds on the window. She stood with her back against the door, breathing hard, looking at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What is this? Where did you get that money?" I remained standing in the center of the room, my arms at my sides, my expression unchanged. "I earned it," I said simply. Amanda shook her head violently, refusing to accept such a straightforward answer. No, that's not possible. You don't earn $47 million working some job nobody's ever heard of. There's something wrong here, something illegal, something you're hiding." She took a step toward me, her voice rising with each word. "What are you hiding from this family? Rachel, where did you get this money?" I met my sister's accusing stare without flinching. The meeting room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in around us, as Amanda's breath came in short, angry bursts. She was waiting for me to crumble, to confess to whatever crime her imagination had constructed. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat down at the small conference table, crossing my legs, as if we were about to discuss something as mundane as weekend plans. "I'm a banker, Rachel," Amanda said, her voice sharp with desperation. "I know what dirty money looks like. I've seen fraud cases, money laundering schemes, inheritance theft. Nobody has $47 million without some explanation. You need to tell me right now where this came from, or I'm reporting this to the compliance department. I'll have investigators crawling through every transaction you've ever made." I gestured toward the computer terminal on the desk in the corner of the room. "Then investigate," I said calmly. "Check the full transaction history. Go back as far as you want, 10 years, 15 years, however long it takes for you to understand." Amanda hesitated, clearly not expecting me to welcome scrutiny. She had assumed I would panic, that I would beg her to keep quiet, that my secret wealth was somehow shameful or criminal. My composure unnerved her, but her need for answers was stronger than her caution. She sat down at the terminal and began pulling up records, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I watched her face as she scrolled through years of financial history. The initial deposits from Sunrise Senior Care appeared first modest amounts in the early years, when my company was just finding its footing. Then came the growth period when we expanded from 1 facility to 3, then to 7, then to a network that spanned multiple states. She saw the proceeds from the sale of the company 2 years ago, a transaction that had been reported in industry publications she had never bothered to read. She found real estate investments in growing markets, dividend payments from carefully chosen stocks, interest from accounts that had been compounding quietly for over a decade. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. Every dollar had a clear origin and a legitimate path into my account. Amanda's scrolling slowed, then stopped entirely. She stared at the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger anymore, even confusion. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when the world you thought you understood reveals itself to be completely different from what you believed. "This can't be right," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You can't have built all this without anyone knowing, without telling us. Why would you hide this?" I did not answer her question. I was not sure she was ready to hear the answer. Amanda stood up abruptly and pulled her phone from her pocket. Before I could react, she was dialing our parents' number, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "Mum, Dad, you need to come to the bank right now. Something is very wrong." She paused, listening to their questions. "Rachel has millions of dollars in a secret account. Millions. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what she's been doing all these years. Just come here, please, I need you." She hung up and turned back to me, her eyes wild. "They're on their way. We're going to get to the bottom of this as a family. Whatever you've been hiding, it ends today." I remained seated, watching my sister unravel. She returned to the computer and began clicking through menus. I recognized screens that would give her access to accounts linked to my primary one. Investment portfolios, savings accounts, business accounts that still bore the name of my company, even after the sale. She was searching for something, anything that would prove her suspicions correct. Amanda," I said quietly, "you don't have authorization to access those accounts." She ignored me, clicking deeper into records she had no legitimate reason to view. I understood then that she was beyond rational thought, driven by a need to find evidence that her worldview was not completely wrong. If my money was clean, if I had truly built something remarkable without anyone noticing, then everything she believed about our family dynamic was a lie. She could not accept that. She would rather find fraud than face the truth. I stood up and walked toward the door. "I need to make a phone call," I said. Amanda barely acknowledged me, too absorbed in her unauthorized search to care where I went. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my own phone, scrolling to a contact I had not needed to use in months. Daniel Morris answered on the second ring, his voice warm and professional as always. He had been my attorney for 8 years, guiding me through the sale of Sunrise Senior Care and helping me manage the wealth that came after. "Rachel," he said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right? I explained the situation briefly. The bank visit, my sister's reaction, the accusations of fraud, the unauthorized access to my accounts. Daniel listened without interruption, and when I finished, his voice had shifted into the focused tone he used when problems needed solving. "I'll be there Monday morning," he said. "In the meantime, request that the bank freeze all internal actions related to your accounts until I arrive. They'll comply, especially once they realize you're a client of significant value. Document everything your sister does. If she's accessing accounts without authorization, that's a serious violation of banking regulations." I thanked him and ended the call, taking a moment to compose myself before returning to the meeting room. The hallway was quiet, but I could feel eyes on me from the nearby offices. Word had spread. The invisible sister had turned out to be something nobody expected, and the staff of Blackwell Bank did not know what to make of it. I pushed open the door to the meeting room and found Amanda exactly where I had left her, hunched over the computer terminal, clicking through screens with frantic energy. She had pulled up at least 3 accounts that had nothing to do with our original transaction accounts. She had no business viewing accounts that existed entirely outside her authority as an assistant branch manager. She did not hear me enter. She was too focused on her search, too desperate to find the proof that would restore her sense of superiority. "What exactly are you doing with my information, Amanda?" I asked, my voice cold and clear in the small room. Amanda jerked away from the computer screen as if I had caught her stealing, which in a sense I had. She stammered excuses about verifying account integrity, about following proper procedures, but we both knew the truth. I told her calmly that my lawyer would arrive Monday and that I expected the bank to freeze all internal actions on my accounts until then. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression stopped her. I left the bank that afternoon and checked into a hotel on the edge of town, needing distance from the family home that had never truly felt like mine. The knock on my hotel room door came Saturday morning, sharp and insistent. I knew before I opened it who would be standing there. My parents had never been subtle about choosing sides, and I had no illusions about which daughter they had come to defend. My father pushed past me into the room before I could speak, his face flushed with anger I had rarely seen directed at anyone but me. My mother followed close behind, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Amanda was not with them, which told me she had sent them as advance troops, preparing the battlefield before she arrived. "How dare you?" my father said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "How dare you humiliate your sister at her workplace, in front of her colleagues, in front of customers? Do you have any idea what you've done to her reputation?" I closed the door and leaned against it, watching my parents position themselves in my small hotel room like prosecutors at a trial. "I didn't humiliate anyone," I said quietly. "I asked to check my account balance. Amanda chose to make it a public performance." My mother shook her head, dismissing my words, as she had dismissed so many of my words over the years. "Whatever money you have, wherever it came from, it doesn't give you the right to destroy your sister's career. She worked hard to get where she is. She earned her position through dedication and sacrifice." The word sacrifice hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside me. A door that had been locked for 10 years began to creak open, pushed by a pressure I could no longer contain. "Sacrifice," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Let me tell you about sacrifice, Mum. Let me tell you something I've never told anyone." My parents exchanged glances, uncertain now. They had expected me to apologize, to back down, to resume my familiar role as the daughter who caused no trouble because she never fought back. But I was done being silent. "In 2014, I said, keeping my voice steady, "Amanda needed $32,000 for a down payment on her house. She called me crying, saying the deal would fall through without it. I told her I would help. But before I could transfer the money myself, something strange happened. The funds disappeared from my account without my authorization." My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. My bank flagged the transaction as unusual, I continued. They called me to verify. I told them to investigate, and they sent me copies of the transfer authorization. It had my signature on it, except I never signed anything. I never authorized that transfer. The room was completely silent now. I could hear my own heartbeat steady and slow as I spoke words I had carried inside me for a decade. I had the signature analysed privately. It was a forgery. A good one, but still a forgery. Someone had taken documents I had signed for other purposes and used them to create a convincing fake. Someone who had access to my personal papers. Someone who knew my banking information. Someone who was desperate for money she didn't want to ask for directly. I looked at my parents, at their frozen expressions, at the understanding dawning in their eyes. Amanda stole $32,000 from me, I said. She forged my signature and took money from my account without permission. And I knew. I've always known. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father seemed to have stopped breathing. I chose not to report it, I said. I chose not to confront her. I told myself it was money I would have given her anyway, that it didn't matter how she got it. I protected her from the consequences of her own actions, because I thought that's what family did. I stayed silent for 10 years because I loved my sister more than I loved being right. I turned to face my parents, directly letting them see the pain I had hidden for so long. And now, Amanda stands in her bank accusing me of fraud. She tells her colleagues my money must be dirty. She calls you in a panic, claiming something is wrong with me. She violates banking regulations by accessing my private accounts without authorization. And you come here to tell me that I'm the one destroying her career. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. My mother sank onto the edge of the hotel bed, her face grey with shock. Amanda, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Is this true? Did you really do this? The question was not directed at me, but at the air, at the universe, at whatever force governed a family where one daughter could steal from another and never face consequences. My mother's eyes grew distant, and she spoke again almost to herself. This is just like before. This is just like when you took those pills. The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands began to tremble, a reaction I could not control. I knew exactly what my mother was referring to. I had found Amanda that night 18 years ago, unconscious in her bedroom with an empty bottle beside her. I had called the ambulance. I had held her hand in the hospital. I had never told anyone what I found in her other hand, clutched against her chest like a confession. A letter I had kept in my wallet ever since. What did you just say, Mum? My voice came out strange, barely controlled shaking with emotions I had buried for nearly 2 decades. What do you know about what happened that year? My mother never answered my question that Saturday. She stood up abruptly, claiming she felt unwell, and my father ushered her out of my hotel room with promises that we would discuss everything later. But I saw the fear in her eyes, the recognition that she had said too much. The weekend passed in tense silence, with no further contact from my parents or Amanda. I spent the hours preparing for Monday, organising documents and gathering my thoughts for what I knew would be a pivotal confrontation. Daniel Morris arrived at Blackwell Bank at 9 o'clock Monday morning, wearing his characteristic navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that had seen 100 negotiations. He had been my attorney through the growth of Sunrise Senior Care, through the sale that changed my life, and through every legal complexity that came with managing significant wealth. I trusted him completely. We were escorted to a conference room on the second floor, larger and more formal than the small meeting room where Amanda had interrogated me 3 days earlier. Waiting for us was a woman I had never met, tall and composed with sharp eyes that missed at nothing. She introduced herself as Victoria Chen, regional representative from the bank's headquarters. She had flown in specifically because of my account status, she explained. Clients of my financial standing warranted personal attention when issues arose. Amanda sat at the far end of the table, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. My parents flanked her on either side, my mother clutching Amanda's hand as if she might disappear. The confident banker who had mocked me in the lobby was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her world was about to collapse. Victoria opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. Our IT department has completed a full audit of account access records, she said, her voice professional and measured. What we found is deeply concerning. She turned to Amanda, her expression neutral, but her words cutting. Ms. Holt, our records show that you have accessed your sister's accounts on 14 separate occasions over the past 5 years. None of these access events were associated with any customer service request or legitimate banking transaction. You are viewing her financial information without authorization and without any business purpose. Amanda's face went white. My mother made a small sound of distress. Furthermore, Victoria continued, on Friday of last week, after discovering the balance in your sister's primary account, you accessed 3 additional linked accounts, including investment portfolios and a business account associated with Sunrise Senior Care LLC. You spent approximately 40 minutes reviewing records you had no authorization to view. This constitutes a serious violation of federal banking regulations and multiple internal policies. The room was silent. I watched my sister shrink into her chair, watched my parents exchange looks of barely concealed panic. Daniel sat beside me, his pen moving across a legal pad as he documented every word. My father cleared his throat. Surely this can be resolved internally, he said, attempting his most reasonable tone. Amanda made a mistake. She was concerned about her sister. Family matters sometimes override professional judgment. Victoria's expression did not change. Mr. Holt, your daughter violated the privacy of a VIP client. The bank takes such violations extremely seriously, regardless of family relationships. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt exhausted. 18 years of silence, 10 years of knowing about the stolen money, and now this. Layer upon layer of betrayal, each one revealed only when circumstances forced it into the light. There's something else, I said, surprising myself by speaking. I turned to face my mother directly. On Saturday, you said something about Amanda and pills. You compared what's happening now to something that happened before. I need you to tell me what you know. My mother's face crumpled. She looked at my father, seeking permission or perhaps rescue, but he offered neither. The weight of secrets had become too heavy to carry. 3 years ago, my mother began, her voice barely above a whisper. I searched your name on the internet, Rachel. I don't know why. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I felt guilty. I found an article about you selling your company. $60 million, the article said. I couldn't believe it. I showed your father. The conference room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. We decided not to tell Amanda. My mother continued, tears streaming down her face. She's always been fragile, Rachel. You know that. We thought if she found out you were more successful than her, she would fall apart. So we kept it secret. We let things continue as they were. I stared at my mother, processing what she had just admitted. You knew for 3 years, and I said slowly, you knew I had built something real. You knew I wasn't a failure. And you sat at family dinners watching Amanda mock me. You let her call me invisible, unsuccessful, pathetic. You chose to protect her ego by destroying mine. Is that what you're telling me? My mother sobbed. My father looked at the table. Amanda sat frozen, learning for the first time that our parents had known about my success all along and deliberately kept it from her. Victoria allowed a moment of silence before speaking again. Ms. Holt, she said, addressing me now, I need to inform you that your sister's violations are serious enough to warrant immediate termination. Additionally, depending on how we proceed, she could be reported to regulatory authorities, which would effectively blacklist her from the banking industry. Her career would be over. My parents turned to me with desperate eyes. My father reached across the table as if to take my hand. "Rachel, please. Whatever has happened between us, she's still your sister. Don't let them destroy her life. You have the power to stop this." Amanda finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She did not speak. Perhaps she knew that any word she offered now would sound hollow, would be seen as manipulation rather than genuine remorse. Victoria folded her hands on the table and looked at me directly. "Ms. Holt, as the affected client, your input matters significantly in how we proceed. I need to ask you formally. Do you want us to move forward with full disciplinary action against your sister?" I asked Victoria for 24 hours to consider my answer. She agreed, understanding that decisions of this magnitude should not be made in the heat of confrontation. The meeting adjourned with nothing resolved, the weight of pending judgment hanging over everyone as we filed out of the conference room. Amanda did not look at me as she left, supported by my parents on either side, like someone leaving a funeral. I returned to my hotel room and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. My mind kept circling back to the same questions, the same memories, the same impossible choices that had defined my entire adult life. I was still lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, when my phone rang Tuesday morning. The caller identified herself as Sarah Chen, a journalist with a national publication that covered healthcare and business. She was writing a feature about innovations in senior care, she explained, and my name kept appearing in her research. Would I be willing to discuss the founding of Sunrise? Senior care, the philosophy behind my approach, the sale that had made industry headlines 2 years ago. I declined the interview politely, explaining that I was dealing with personal matters. But the conversation rattled me in ways I had not expected. The journalist spoke of my company as if it were well known, as if my work had made a genuine impact on an industry that affected millions of families. She mentioned awards I had received, partnerships I had built, testimonials from families who credited my facilities with giving their elderly loved ones dignity in their final years. I had spent so long hiding my success that I had forgotten other people actually knew about it. The call ended, but its effects lingered. I learned later that Amanda had been in the hallway outside the conference room when the journalist called my cell phone. She heard enough of the conversation to understand that her sister was not merely wealthy, but accomplished, recognized, respected in ways Amanda had never imagined. According to my mother, who called me that afternoon, Amanda had gone home and not emerged from her bedroom since. My parents arrived at my hotel room an hour later, looking older than I had ever seen them. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying. My father moved slowly, as if carrying a physical weight on his shoulders. They sat on the small couch across from my bed and began their final appeal. "Please forgive Amanda," my mother said, her voice breaking on every word. "She's your sister. She's still young in so many ways. She made terrible mistakes, but don't ruin her life over them. You have everything now. You have money, success, recognition. Can't you find it in your heart to show mercy?" I listened to my mother plead for Amanda's future, and something inside me finally snapped. Not with anger, but with a clarity that had been building for days. "Did you ever say forgive, Rachel?" I asked quietly. "When Amanda mocked me at family dinners, did you ever tell her to stop? When she called me invisible and pathetic, did you ever defend me when she stole $32,000 from my account? Did you ever demand that she apologize? Did you ever even once protect me?" My parents had no answer. They sat in silence, confronted by questions they could not deflect. "I think you should leave now," I said. "I need to be alone." They left without argument, perhaps understanding that there was nothing more they could say. I locked the door behind them and stood in the middle of my hotel room, feeling the weight of 18 years pressing down on me. I reached for my wallet. Inside, tucked behind my driver's license and credit cards, was a yellowed piece of paper folded into quarters. I had carried it with me every day since I was 18 years old. I had never shown it to anyone. I had never spoken of it. But now, finally, I needed to look at it again. I unfolded the paper carefully, the creases so worn that the edges were beginning to separate. The handwriting was Amanda's younger and more desperate than the confident script she used now. The words were seared into my memory, but I read them anyway. I can't live in her shadow anymore. I'll never be as good as Rachel. Everyone loves her more. Everyone thinks she's smarter, prettier, better. I'd rather disappear than spend my whole life being second best. I'm sorry. Please, don't blame yourselves. This is the only way I can stop hurting. I remembered the night I found this letter. Amanda was 18, I was 22. She had swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills after learning that I had won a full scholarship to the state university. I found her unconscious on her bedroom floor, the letter clutched in her hand. I called the ambulance. I rode with her to the hospital. I held her hand while they pumped her stomach. And when she woke up, when she looked at me with those confused, frightened eyes, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I gave up the scholarship. I told my parents Amanda should have the opportunity instead. I took a job at the local grocery store and watched my sister go to college in my place. I built my company in secret, never mentioning my successes at family gatherings, never correcting anyone who assumed I was struggling. I made myself invisible so that Amanda would never again feel like she was living in my shadow. 18 years of sacrifice, 18 years of being mocked by the very person I had given up everything to protect. I folded the letter and held it in my palm, feeling the weight of all those lost years. The question was not whether to forgive Amanda. The question was whether I finally had the right to step out of the shadows, whether I deserved to be seen. I walked out of my hotel room and drove to the bank. The conference room was waiting, filled with the same people who had gathered yesterday. My parents, my sister, the lawyers, the bank representative. They all turned to look at me as I entered. I looked directly at Amanda, the sister I had saved and hidden from and protected for almost 2 decades. "Do you want to know why I hid everything for 18 years? I asked. "I'll tell you. I'll tell everyone." The conference room fell completely silent. Every eye was fixed on me as I reached into my pocket and withdrew the yellowed piece of paper I had carried for 18 years. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it, the worn creases threatening to tear with each movement. I placed the letter on the table and slid it toward Amanda. "Read it," I said. "Read what you wrote the night I found you unconscious on your bedroom floor." Amanda stared at the paper as if it might bite her. Her hand shook as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. I watched the colour drain from her face as she recognised her own words, her own desperation, her own teenage despair, preserved on paper for nearly 2 decades. "I can't live in her shadow anymore," Amanda read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll never be as good as Rachel. I'd rather disappear than spend my whole life being second best." My mother gasped. My father gripped this edge of the table. Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances, but remained silent, understanding that this moment belonged to our family alone. "You were 18, I said to Amanda. "You had just learned that I won a full scholarship. You swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills because you couldn't bear the thought of being compared to me for the rest of your life. I found you on the floor. I called the ambulance. I held your hand in the hospital while they saved your life." Amanda was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the memories returned. She had blocked that night from her mind, buried it beneath years of achievement and confidence, and carefully constructed superiority. "When you woke up," I continued, "I made a decision. I gave up my scholarship. I told our parents you should have the opportunity instead. I took a job and watched you go to college in my place. And for the next 18 years, I built my life in secret. I never mentioned my successes. I never corrected anyone who thought I was failing. I made myself invisible so that you would never again feel like you were living in my shadow." The room was utterly still. Amanda clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing with a grief that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long buried. "I sacrificed 18 years of being seen," I said. 18 years of being celebrated or valued by my own family, and you used that sacrifice as a weapon against me. You mocked me at every dinner table. You called me invisible and pathetic. You stole from me and then accused me of fraud. That is what I protected you from discovering. That is why I hid everything. Amanda looked up at me with eyes full of shame, not the shame of being caught, but the deeper shame of finally understanding. "Rachel," she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't remember. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I turned to Victoria. "I've made my decision," I said. "I will not report my sister to the authorities. I will not pursue civil action against her, but I will not pretend that what happened can simply be forgiven and forgotten." Victoria nodded, waiting for me to continue. "Amanda will be terminated from her current position. That is the bank's decision based on her violations, and I will not interfere with it. However, I request that she be allowed to reapply at a different branch in 6 months at a lower position on one condition. She must complete 6 months of community service at a senior care facility. She needs to understand what it means to serve others instead of being served." Victoria made notes on her legal pad. "That can be arranged," she said. "There's one more thing," I said, turning back to Amanda. "Before any of this happens, you will write an apology to me, a real one, and you will read it aloud in front of our entire family. Not because I need to humiliate you, but because you need to say the words out loud. You need to hear yourself acknowledge what you did." Amanda nodded, still crying. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll do whatever you ask." Finally, I looked at my parents. They sat together, diminished, somehow smaller than I had ever seen them. "I don't need your apology," I said. "What I need is for you to look in the mirror and ask yourselves one question. If Amanda had been the successful one, would you have treated me this way? Would you have let her mock and belittle me for 18 years? I already know the answer. I just need you to admit it to yourselves." Neither of them spoke. Perhaps there was nothing left to say. 3 months later, I stood in a small classroom in downtown Blackwell. 15 women sat before me, ranging in age from 42 to 67. They were the first recipients of the Second Chance Scholarship, a program I had established for women who had sacrificed their education for their families and now wanted to return to learning. "I used to think silence was love," I told them. "I thought that hiding my success, making myself small, so others could feel big, was the most loving thing I could do. I was wrong. True love is letting people see you as you really are, not to punish them, but to give them the chance to love the real you." The women nodded, many of them wiping tears from their eyes. They understood sacrifice. They understood invisibility. They understood the courage it took to finally step into the light. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It contained no request for money, no plea for help with Amanda, no attempt to leverage my success. It simply said, "How are you, Rachel? We were thinking about you today." It was not much, but it was a beginning. Across town at the Sunrise Senior Care Facility, where I had started my journey 15 years ago, Amanda sat beside an elderly woman named Dorothy. She was reading aloud from a book of poetry, her voice gentle and patient. No one was watching. No one was there to applaud her or validate her kindness. She was simply present, giving her time to someone who needed it. For the first time in her life, Amanda was learning what it meant to give instead of take. The redemption would be slow. It would be difficult. But it had finally begun. Success doesn't change people. It reveals who truly cared when you had nothing. But more importantly, it reveals who you become when you finally allow yourself to be seen. And so, Rachel's story comes to an end, though in many ways it is just the beginning. She spent 18 years in the shadows, sacrificing her own light so that someone else could shine. She endured mockery from the very person she had saved. She watched her parents choose favourites while pretending they loved both daughters equally. And when the truth finally came out, she did not choose revenge. She chose something harder. She chose healing. But here is what stays with me most about Rachel's journey. She did not wait for her family to validate her worth. She did not need their approval to know that she had built something meaningful. The $47 million in her account was not what made her valuable. It was simply proof of what she had always been, a woman of strength, resilience, and quiet determination. How many of us have felt invisible in our own families? How many of us have sacrificed our dreams so that someone else could have theirs? How many of us have stayed silent when we should have spoken up, believing that love meant making ourselves small? Rachel's story reminds us that true love does not ask us to disappear. True love celebrates who we really are. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is step out of the shadows and let ourselves be seen. I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family? Have you ever sacrificed something important to protect someone who never knew what you gave up? What would you have done if you were in Rachel's position? Would you have revealed the truth, or would you have kept the secret forever? Please share your experiences and opinions in the comments below. Your stories matter, and I know that many of you have walked paths similar to Rachel's. Let us build a community where we can support each other and remind one another that our worth does not depend on whether others see it. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new audio dramas every week, stories of family betrayal, redemption, and the strength it takes to rise above our circumstances. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, success does not change people. It reveals who truly cared when you had nothing. But more importantly, it reveals who you become when you finally allow yourself to be seen. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.